As you can see, we're going to talk about the New Orleans Saints to start. 2024 draft wrapped up last week. And, you know, we're going to talk about each pick individually and go over it a little bit. But I think as a whole, I'll start off by saying I think the Saints did a fantastic job. I think they had one of the best drafts we've had personally since 2017, where we took 5 really good players. 2 rookies of the year, 1 stalwart of the offensive line, and then, Trey Hendrickson, who ended up playing really good for us, went to Cincinnati, and now is, looking for his way out of there. We took a bunch of good players. So I think this was probably our best draft since then. I'm really excited about what we did. And then we can break down the picks a little bit further.
Yeah, the thing that shocked me the most is the ability to find the diamonds in the rough and sticking and picking in the late rounds, which honestly are some of my favorite picks this year.
Yeah, there was definitely some things that they did, especially that Green Bay trade that I at first thought was questionable, but seeing how we came out of that, I think that we won.
Yeah, I think we did a really good job, and let's get into the individual picks here. Starting off, pick 14, a place where a lot of people either had us sticking and picking, getting an offensive tackle, or even moving up for one. And we get a guy who was very popular among the mock drafts in Taliese Fuaga. There is a little bit of debate about how his name is said, but that's the way we're going to say it today because it's the way it reads the best. So Taliese Fuaga, pick 14. Rebo Hustle, you are our resident offensive lineman, so why don't you give us a breakdown about what Fuaga does?
Yeah, Fuaga's, in my opinion, the best run blocker in this draft. He really gets after it, stays square, doesn't ever play nose over toes. He's really a raw pass blocking tackle, which he showed well at the Senior Bowl, what he could do at the NFL level against highly talented defensive linemen. But all in all, he was the best tackle left on the board when the Saints came up at 14. We couldn't make anything happen. There was talks that we were moving up. Some people say it was for Michael Penix. I think it was for a offensive lineman, and you just couldn't get a deal done. So you stick and pick, get the best player available, and that's Taliese Fuaga.
Yeah. I would definitely thought and liked that the Saints went with offensive line with their first-round pick, especially with, everything with Ramczyk. And just the injuries we've battled on the offensive line throughout the past few seasons. I think getting a guy like this who can play right or left tackle really secures a nice foundation moving forward for this team, and frees up a lot of opportunities for him on this O-line.
Yeah, he was fantastic in the post-college season, pre-NFL season workouts. I mean, he did great at the Combine. He did great at his pro day. Killed the Senior Bowl. So, he kind of was one of those guys where people knew he was going to go high, but really cemented himself as a first rounder with all of that postseason hype. And he's just a really, really good player. I think, like Rebo Hustle said, run blocking wise, he is a nasty run blocker. Like, he is going to move you off the line of scrimmage. He's not a guy who's just going to hold his own. He is going to be the cement of your run blocking scheme. We had talked about, the versatility where he can play right. He can play right tackle. He may be able to kick over to left. We've never seen him there, but you never know what can happen. But he can also play inside because he does have such a good run blocking prowess. If there was any question, it would be the pass blocking. He's a good pass blocker, but he wasn't necessarily the best one in the draft. So if there were a question, I think that would be it. But if you look at the depth of position here, Trevor Penning, Nick Saldiveri, Landon Young, Oli Udoh, those are the guys he really has to play up against. I think he is a plug-and-play right tackle with Ramczyk's health being questionable, and if Ramczyk can be healthy, you move him over to left, and you have all 4 of those guys competing for the left guard job.
Yeah, definitely like the pick here. I really think we got our best fit available. That was, the way the cards fell. I like the way it worked out.
Yeah. If we base it off of everybody in the draft, I'd give this pick maybe an A-, but considering who was on the board and who's available and where we were picking at, A+ pick by the Saints there. Then we had that trade that you mentioned earlier. We move up from 45 to 41, giving up 168 and 190, which, in the grand scheme of things really didn't matter too much because we had 3 5th-rounders, a 6th-rounder, and a 7th-rounder. So it's not like we were hurting in draft stock. So, we move up 4 picks while giving up 2 very late picks to get a guy you two have been loving all along in Kool-Aid McKinstry Mustang. Talk about Kool-Aid.
Well, like we've stated before, his draft stock kind of dropped because of the amazing season his teammate had, Terrion Arnold. But like we talked about before, Terrion Arnold's success, that is, really came because of how locked down Kool-Aid McKinstry was this past season and the season before, to where quarterbacks didn't even want to test him. I really like having an over-athletic guy at the position like we have here, someone who could just lock down your number one, like people are saying about Cooper DeJean. I don't know if y'all seen that, but that's awesome.
Oh, I sent it to you on TikTok.
Did you?
Don't you worry.
Yeah. But yeah, I really like the pick. I was definitely a little skeptical when we traded up 3 draft picks to move up only 4 spots. But I really like the way it played out. I have high hopes for this defense with the addition of Kool-Aid McKinstry.
Yeah, and he's by far the best press man corner in this draft. I mean, Terrion Arnold was playing a lot of off-ball, a lot of off coverage, and Quinyon Mitchell was known as a pass breakup kind of guy. But in 2022, Kool-Aid McKinstry had one of the best seasons from a cornerback in recent memory, and that played into him not being tested very much in 2023.
Yeah, I mean, before the season, Kool-Aid was a top 10, top 15 draft prospect. Dropped off a little bit because of the drop in production, but like you guys point out, that could be due to the fact that quarterbacks weren't thrown his way anymore. I mean, we looked at the numbers before the podcast started. It looked like Terrion Arnold got tested twice as much as Kool-Aid did. 79 targets against Terrion Arnold, were only 39 against Kool-Aid. Although he didn't have the interceptions that Terrion had, it's because he got targeted 40 less times. So, Kool-Aid was somebody I was kind of, no pun intended, cool on. Before I really started hearing you guys and watching the film and paying attention to more than just box scores. But by the end of the draft process, I had him at cornerback 3. So to get the 3rd best cornerback in the 2nd round, for somebody who has proven that they can play the position at a high level against elite talent, that's really hard to pass up. So trading up 4 spots to get him, great move by Mickey Loomis, I think, in my opinion. As you can see, depth of position, obviously Marshawn Lattimore's there, but he is somebody who's now on the trade block, somebody who we could consider moving, which would automatically move guys like Alontae Taylor and Paulson Adebo into a bigger light. I think there's a very versatile way you can use all 4 of those DBs. You can imagine them in almost any set, and it makes sense. 4 young, really good corners at the position, so I'm really excited to see what we do. Again, considering who was on the board, what we did, and what we did to move up, A-plus pick by the Saints here.
Yeah, I agree. And, kind of going off what you said about, having this depth at this position, me and Rebo talked earlier about, how it possibly could look if we do keep Marshawn Lattimore for the years coming. I don't see why Alontae Taylor couldn't slide to safety. He's played there before at Tennessee, and he's played it pretty good. I know I was big on him coming out of the draft because he was versatile like that. He could play both positions. I could see him either way. It does kind of scare me because I know how good he's been at corner. He's always going to the ball, regardless of whether it's on his side of the field or not. He's getting his nose in every tackle, and I think that at safety he could do even better.
Yeah, Taylor's a great coverage guy, so it's hard to think, hey, we're going to drop him back to safety and let him play the field. But like you mentioned, he is so physical and so good in the run game, you can obviously see him switching over to safety and making it work. The biggest question mark here for me is what do we do with Adebo? He's in a contract year, so this is kind of like a make it or break it type year for him. And it's hard to think that he's going to be able to show off that amount of ability when Kool-Aid's coming in trying to take a spot. Moving on from the Kool-Aid to somebody who is a very, what's the word for it? Controversial pick. Spencer Rattler. Now, obviously, you can see we had over 100 picks in between the last pick and this one. We sat back. We let the board fall how it may. Didn't move up, didn't move down, stuck in pick with what we had, and we decided to address the quarterback position. Spencer Rattler, 4-year starter, played 2 years at Oklahoma, ended up getting benched for Caleb Williams, goes into South Carolina, and just kind of takes over that team. Doesn't necessarily do anything super flashy and become this Joe Burrow level quarterback, but he definitely wasn't the worst quarterback we've ever seen, and he held his own in the SEC, which I think is really important. For me, what really impressed me out of Spencer Rattler is his growth and development, not only as a quarterback but as a person. He went from this guy people were looking at on the Netflix show QB1 as this like punk kid who didn't care about anything other than himself to somebody who's wearing a C on his chest. And for me, that's really important, not only as a player on the field, but what you're going to bring in the locker room. As far as on the field goes, short to intermediate accuracy is where he finds his game at. He really excelled in that 8 to 12 yard range, which is something we've seen from the Saints offense work really well. When you can hit those first down catches, and you could do it with high accuracy, that's something that Spencer Rattler did at 70% completion percentage, which was the highest of his career. He got better every single year he played. I think that's really important, and a lot of people don't love this pick. They think he's, the Saints are doing this to try to push out Derek Carr or whatever. I think letting him sit and learning for a couple years, there's nothing wrong with taking a quarterback in the 5th round when you haven't invested in that position heavily over the past 20 years.
Yeah, I mean, he fell so far in the draft because of how hectic the first round was at the quarterback position. People were saying it whenever we turned in his name that, hey, a lot of people cooled off on quarterback. We probably could have seen Spencer Rattler go in the 3rd or 4th round. But Spencer Rattler was really a Heisman candidate to begin the year. Offensive line fell off once SEC play started, and so I'm excited to see him in preseason or in the future as a Saint, just to see what that arm can do when protected well.
Yeah, he was regarded as a pretty talented player coming into college for a reason. He's got the talent. I think he just, didn't find the right spot in Oklahoma and then started to mold into himself at South Carolina. I really don't mind this pick, especially considering, our current backup quarterback situation. I think it's a great pick to add some depth and like a safety valve almost at that position.
Yeah, I think the floor is so much higher, and not only the floor, but the ceiling is so much higher for Spencer Rattler than it is for a guy like Jake Haener, Nathan Peterman, and I think even Kellen Mond's on the roster right now. So the fact that you can get a guy who has probably a higher floor and higher ceiling to step in, learn, a guy who has 4 years starting experience in college football in 2 elite conferences on 2 really good programs, I think I don't see how this can be a bad pick for the Saints. I know, people are saying, oh, you wasted a pick on a quarterback. It's never wasting a pick, especially if he can sit there, learn, and develop into something that can win you 2 to 3 games and then maybe evolve to a starter.
Yeah, and you invested a 4th-round pick in Haener last year. Yeah, you took Spencer Rattler in the 5th this year, but it's hard to look at the numbers there because of how poorly Haener looked in the preseason and the small amount of snaps that he got during the regular season. And so I think that it was a position of need that really needed to be addressed, the backup quarterback.
Yeah, and I'm glad we did it with a guy as highly touted as Spencer Rattler. 7th quarterback off the board, even though there was over 100 picks in between quarterback 6 and quarterback 7. Pick number 170. One of the best names in the draft to pair with Kool-Aid McKinstry, Bub Means. Great name. And a pretty good player, too. He showed out at the combine, ran sub 4.5, which is very impressive for somebody like him. He's 6'2", 220, physical and mental toughness. And my favorite quote that I saw from Bub Means, after the draft, they asked him, what role do you want to play on the team? What do you think you bring to the table? And he said, if you don't block, you don't get the rock. So he obviously is somebody who's going to play his position the way it should be played, and that's doing whatever you need to do to win. In a Clint Kubiak offense, that's a branch off of Kyle Shanahan, where the 49ers love to have their receivers blocking downfield. If he really has not only the ability to block, but the mentality to block, that's going to be really big on getting him on the field early.
Yeah, I agree. Especially, we've seen some of these receivers kind of have, that big head, that ego, to where they're too good to block, and it definitely rubs fans the wrong way. So I'm glad to see that, he's noticed it and he doesn't want his name to be used like that. And also the fact that, he realizes it's a team sport. Wins come first.
Right.
Stats come second. And I'm really glad that, he put that out there.
Yeah, and wide receiver had to be addressed in this draft. We kept saying that it had to be addressed in the second round. That didn't happen this weekend. But with names like Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed solidified as the top 2 receivers for the Saints, the third and fourth receivers position is a battle right now, not including Bub Means with A.T. Perry, with A.T. Perry, Cedric Wilson Jr., and Equanimeous St. Brown. We saw some great flashes out of A.T. Perry this past season. Does he continue to get better? Most likely, but you always need a wide receiver 4 no matter what happens.
Yeah, Mustang does love AT.
I do. Another guy I do like is Equanimeous St. Brown. We've definitely seen flashes of him in Chicago to where he's been like, okay, he's got some skill. So I could definitely see him, making some moves, impressing some people, and moving up that depth part pretty fast.
Yeah, and his brother is the highest paid receiver in the league now for the Detroit Lions. So he has football in his blood. I think it's going to be a good little wide receiver battle in camp. It's always fun to watch training camp from like who's going to make the final 53, who's going to secure that 5th or 6th wide receiver spot. Same thing with pretty much any skill position like 3rd running back, 5th corner, stuff like that. I think Bub Means definitely has the potential to make the final 53, and even if not, he'll be our first guy on the practice squad. I think he's definitely got some potential, and hope we see him on Sundays. Rebo Hustle, I'm going to let you take this one.
My favorite gem of this draft, pick 175, Jalen Ford, a massive linebacker, 6'3". Yes. But rare size for the linebacker position these days. A guy that in a league that only Roquan Smith is a massive linebacker that can get sideline to sideline, seeing a guy like Jalen Ford being able to get creative in the pass game, where he's not necessarily a speed threat like a Devin White, but just being able to read the quarterback's eyes, and with that size, he's such a great run stopper. And I didn't even know this until today. He had 4 forced fumbles and 6 picks. Guy knows what he's doing.
Yeah, one of my favorite, player types in the NFL is that classic middle linebacker role. Those big guys who, while they are huge and can stop the run, fill those gaps, can also get sideline to sideline. So you saying that really
He's creative. Like it's not necessarily a flash of speed, but he knows exactly where the quarterback's putting that ball.
Reba Hustle made the comparison earlier to Devin White. Not saying he is Devin White, but saying he has some of those similar qualities where he can play sideline to sideline. He creates turnovers at that linebacker position, and he has like just this unending motor to him. I know there's a lot of things Devin White has done to the Saints that have made him not super popular around here anymore.
But he's a Tiger.
He's a Tiger. Yeah,
he is a Tiger at
he's
heart.
He's like Devin White at LSU.
Yeah, and he's bigger. I mean, he's 6'3", 240, I think is the size. So, like Rebo said, he doesn't fit necessarily the prototypical size of a current linebacker in the NFL. But when you have that size and you can also run downhill and stop the run at the line of scrimmage while dropping back, getting 6 picks over your career, and they weren't like 6 interceptions that just so happened to fall into his hands. Like he was reading the eyes of the quarterback, followed the pass, made an impressive catch. So he wasn't somebody I was super familiar with before the draft process, but since Rebo Hustle has been talking him up, I've been looking at him, and he has the opportunity to take DeMario's spot once DeMario's gone and fill in that role very, very well.
Yeah, I knew he was like this amazing run stopper just watching the college football playoff last year. But since we've drafted him, I got a little bit deeper into his film, and I sent Redfish some videos last night, and it's just incredible how well he can read the quarterback on pass plays.
Yeah, I know we've touched on it before about those defensive captains, those foundations we have, getting close to the end of their career, DeMario Davis being one. I'm glad to see that we might have, found a diamond in the rough being DeMario's replacement this late in the draft.
Absolutely. Moving on to our second to last pick here, pick 199, Christian Boyd. Don't love the college he came out of just because of us being burnt by him a couple of years ago with Trevor Penning. But it's a rotational piece to the interior. Of course, a pick this late's never guaranteed to make the 53. But Malcolm Roach is gone from the team. That's 22 to 24 snaps per game that you're missing there. Of course, you can make those up with Brzee and Shepard and Saunders, but you're going to need to find somebody who can kind of come in and just be, that 10 to 12 snap a game type of dude, stop the run on third downs if it's a third and short. Just a smart football player who has a high motor, and that's what you're looking at with Christian Boyd.
Yeah, day 3, I saw his name get announced, and I was like, who is this guy? I know once you get to around the 200 or later range, you're kind of just swinging on upside. You're not necessarily swinging for a guy that is definitely going to make your roster. But so I watched some film on him, and it just seemed like he wasn't very creative in his pass rush, but it was relentless. If the quarterback got out of the pocket, he was always the first guy there. He doesn't quit. He doesn't know how to quit, and that's exciting to see out of a guy that is just so raw.
You can teach technique, you can teach skill, but you can't teach motor. You can't teach energy. You can't teach the willingness to fight and the willingness to get to the quarterback or the running back in the backfield. So I like that he has the intangibles that you can build upon once he gets into the pro locker room.
Yeah. Like y'all said, he's got heart, which makes me, really happy for his upside of being that rotational piece on the defensive line. If someone needs a break, having him come in won't be the end of the world.
Because you absolutely need a fourth guy. Like, we have the 3 that are listed there, Brzee, Shepard, and Saunders, but there's not a solidified fourth guy. So I think out of the 2 guys that we ended this draft with, Christian Boyd has a high likelihood of making this roster.
And it always feels good, and we'll talk about it with the last guy as well. It always feels good when you go through a draft class and you're like, all these guys are going to make the 53, or at least most of them will,
Feels
and
good,
that's
yeah.
kind of how we feel right now. Is that all of these guys are not necessarily locks, but high contenders to make our final roster. So when you have a full draft class of that, you come home happy. And our last guy, definitely the biggest swing of the draft, and you kind of have to be that way when you're 20 picks from the end, Josiah Ezerim. Raw athlete with ideal size. Very, very athletic player, played D-tackle. For his first year of college. This is only his second year playing on the O-line, so he definitely needs to learn some technique, learns, how to move his hands with his feet, and, teaching himself rather than to explode, laterally off the ball, maybe, exploding vertically. However you want to explain it from the O-line perspective. That's our O-line guy right there, not me. But, yeah, super athletic guy, can move, has all the tools. When you pair it with his 6'6", I think he's 340, 320. So he's got the size. We'll see if he makes the 53 man, but definitely the biggest swing in this draft.
Yeah, I'm interested to see what he can do in training camp or rookie mini camp, whatever stage he gets to. Just off of a pure offensive line technique, he's got a lot of things to clean up. But you got a raw athlete, a guy that has a high motor. You never seen him just quit on a play. We watched a little bit of film earlier just to get familiar with him. So, yeah, I'm not expecting him to be a starter in the next 2 years, 3 years. Maybe he'll be a rotational piece for us in the future. But his eyes need to be solely set on competing for this 53-man roster.
Yeah. I'm not going to lie to you. I've never heard of this guy. But from the way y'all are talking about him, I have faith. I think, like you said, coming to the future, he could be a rotational piece. But, more importantly, like, if he's willing to put in the work and has the heart, has the grind, the Saints will find a way to use him.
Yeah, and, he made third-team All-American this past season in college football while only playing the position 2 years. So, obviously, he's got some room to grow, but he's doing good work. And if you look at the depth of position there, it's not like we have like solidified starters. We have 4 guys now, adding Fuaga, that are pretty much solidified for that starting lineup. If Ramczyk is healthy, if not, we have another spot open. But you look at Trevor Penning, you look at Nick Saldiveri, who was a late round pick last year, Landon Young, late round pick 2 years ago, Oli Udo, who we gave a small contract to in the offseason. So it's not like this is a set battle where he's battling for one spot. If he can really show up and show out, he has a chance to solidify himself on this roster. So I think that pretty much wraps up our Saints draft. Overall, I'd say I'd give our draft an A minus. I think obviously, taking the upswing on these last 2 picks, we don't have necessarily the highest floor in these guys, but when you're picking in the 6th and 7th round and you're a team that has a lot of older veterans, you want to get those young talents who can learn and they have the tools in the toolbox, but not necessarily have the technique and veteran presence that they need.